To do something like this in someone's new home, the sense of immorality is just crazy, huh? I can hear the giggles of a young woman just through the door. My husband is laughing along with her. It's the room in our new house that was supposed to be our bedroom. On the other side of this door, my husband is with another woman. Hey, don't you feel a bit sorry for his wife? Not at all, I always decided it would be you first. Despite talking about immorality, her tone showed no hint of remorse. And my husband's voice, I could tell he was smirking, it was so lighthearted. Hearing their voices, I painfully realized that my husband has no feelings for me. I can't believe it, and I don't want to, but my breathing gets heavier with the shock. The new house that was just finished for us, I couldn't have imagined this turn of events just a while ago. The arrangement of the bed, the color of the bedding, the design of the indirect lighting that also serves as decor. We were supposed to start making this room a place where we could fully relax after a long day. For this, we saved up money for years, nearly spending it all, but it seemed like nothing compared to the excitement for our new life. But now, it's all falling apart right before my eyes. I'm so shocked, I could literally faint, my head is in my hands. What should I do now? Should I confront them right away? Or should I record this as evidence? But if I go in, what if they turn violent? I hesitate, fearing for my safety. While I'm pondering, I notice a long rod in the corner of my eye. It's a tension rod, bought for safety. I was planning to put it between the ceiling and a shelf after finishing unpacking. Seeing it, a slight smile forms on my lips. That's right, I could just lock them in. My name is Holly. I'm a 29-year-old working at a multinational company, and I met my 32-year-old husband while handling some official paperwork. We don't have kids. While we're living comfortably now, I grew up poor. In a rundown apartment with shared bathrooms and hardly any meat to eat, feeling hungry almost every day. It was too embarrassing to invite friends over as a kid. My parents worked tirelessly, but our situation never improved, and family vacations were an unattainable dream. Some say love is all you need, but without money, you can't do anything. My parents, who married for love, were always arguing about money. Perhaps that's why my dream was always to live a life not troubled by money. Fortunately, I was good at studies, went to a college on a scholarship, and took as many useful qualifications as I could. Thanks to my hard work, I landed a high-paying job at a multinational company, and a few years ago, I was finally able to move my parents out of that rundown apartment. My next dream became building a brand new home. I wanted to live in a newly built house with my future family. Looking at my bank account every month became a source of joy, holding on to that hope. I met my husband, a public servant, when I went to submit some official documents for my company at the government office. During the process, we had to make several corrections and revisions, and gradually, we started noticing each other and eventually got married. It was just when we were discussing building our dream home. My husband, Ken, came to me with an apology, saying he might be saddled with a huge debt. When I pressed him for details, he confessed he had become a guarantor for a startup business of a close friend, which had unfortunately failed. Luckily, his friend didn't run away and was working hard to repay the debt, but debt restructuring was imminent. That meant the creditors would soon come after Ken as a guarantor. I'm sorry, Holly, but he's been my friend since childhood, and I really want to help him, Ken said with a pale face. To my apologizing husband, I asked, "How much do you need?" "You can use my savings." He looked up at me, dumbfounded, and I smiled. We can always earn more money. But lost friendships don't come back. I never had a close friend as a child, always putting up walls because of our poverty. That's why Ken's kindness to help his friend touched my heart. I nodded at him, looking up for confirmation. "We're a team, thanks for talking to me about it." Later, just as Ken had said, we received the bill for the huge debt of about $600,000, combining my savings for our dream home and what he had saved. We managed to pay it off. "Thank you, Holly." "It's okay, it was nothing." I was actually disappointed that my dream home was now further away, but I didn't want Ken to feel worse, so I just shrugged it off. And so, I started working even harder, doing lots of overtime to save up again for our home. However, as I started coming home late from work, Ken's behavior began to change. I realized something was off when we finally started to gather enough for a deposit on our home and began discussing the purchase. When we talked about how to pay for the house, Ken, who had previously agreed to share the cost, confessed that he had almost no savings left due to the debt and other loans he had given to his friend, leaving him unable to contribute to our home fund. "Could you pay from your account for now, Holly? You earn more than me, so it should be fine, right?" I felt uneasy about his words, but my childhood experiences, when money was tight, clouded my judgment. In fact, it was easier to just pay from my account, and I didn't want to upset Ken, who became moody whenever we discussed our home finances, so I agreed to make the payments. I remember feeling a chill when Ken thanked me, his eyes not quite smiling. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just my imagination, and proceeded with the arrangements. Then, just when our new house was about to be completed, Ken started insisting that the house should be in his name. I was confused by his serious demeanor. After all, I had made most of the payments for our home, and Ken had contributed only a small amount. It was hard to refuse when he talked about wanting to help his dear friend, and it didn't seem like he had no intention of paying at all, so I hadn't been too forceful. But now, when I had paid the majority and he wanted the house in his name, I couldn't just agree. "Why are you saying this all of a sudden? The mortgage is in my name because you couldn't get approved. You can't just ask for the deed like that." When I said that, Ken shrugged his shoulders as if he was really troubled. "Come on, I'm paying the living expenses, right? I read somewhere that the monthly mortgage amount is about the same as living expenses. So, it's like I'm paying the mortgage too, right? And since you earn more, it's only natural that you pay," he said, puffing out his chest proudly. He probably didn't realize how absurd his claim was. The living expenses Ken claims to pay are just for groceries. Having exhausted his savings and most of his salary going to help his friend, he never paid for utilities like electricity or water bills. What he's referring to must be the cost of living expenses, including rent for apartments or condos. Doesn't he understand, working at the government office, that the few $1,000s he contributes each month are nowhere near the monthly mortgage payments? He's forgotten that he's completely dependent on me and somehow convinced himself he's paying an equal share. "Yeah, I'm the one paying. It's not that simple to just change the ownership. Besides, whose name it's in shouldn't matter, we're married." I sighed in exasperation. Ken looked at me pleadingly. "Don't say that, Holly, please. For my pride as a man, I want it to be known that I built this house." When I asked for the reason, it turned out he had boasted to his parents that he had paid for the house himself. "Why did you tell such a lie?" When I asked why he had lied, his face turned sour. "What's that supposed to mean, Holly? You don't want to support your husband? I can't tell people that my younger wife paid for the house." This wasn't about whether or not I support my husband. My question was about why he felt the need to brag like that. "There's no need to say who paid what, right?" I replied, feeling irritated. I understand having pride, but that's no excuse for lying, and there's no need to specifically mention who made the house payments. Especially since Ken hasn't really paid for the house. To be honest, I thought I was being generous by agreeing to joint ownership. "Come on, don't be mad. I'll pay my share eventually. Just change the ownership first," he said, trying to calm me down and put his arm around my shoulder. I gently moved his hand away and stood up from the worn-out sofa. I had no intention of changing the ownership, and Ken kept insisting. This conversation was going nowhere. I sighed and ended the discussion forcibly. It was the day we were finally getting our new house. Ken had been pestering me daily to change the ownership, but I firmly refused. His persistent attitude was starting to make me suspicious. But without knowing what exactly was wrong, the day had arrived. I couldn't attend the handover due to work, so I had asked Ken to be there. However, I finished earlier than expected and got permission from my boss to leave early. Explaining it was the handover day for our dream home, my boss readily agreed. Despite my reservations about Ken's behavior, the joy of finally getting our home made my heart leap. I wondered if the handover was already done. Having visited the construction site several times, seeing it completed was particularly emotional. After changing trains and buses, I saw the unfamiliar sight of our new home. Finally, our house was completed. Excited, I reached for the front door, which was unlocked. Was he still getting some explanation? Curious, I entered the living room and looked around. Ken's bag and a paper bag were thrown on the floor. "Ken?" I called out, but there was no answer. I thought it was strange, and moved towards the back of the house, to the room we intended to use as a bedroom. I could hear voices, definitely not from a real estate agent showing the house. As I approached the door, I stopped dead in my tracks. "No way, Ken!" A woman's voice exclaimed, clearly not discussing property. The loud voices, unreserved in the detached house, leaked through the door gap. Shocked and trembling, I peered through the gap. There, the man who was supposed to be my husband was involved with an unfamiliar woman. What on earth was happening? My head went blank. This was supposed to be my dream home. Yet there was my husband with another woman. Amidst my confusion, the woman's indecent exclamations snapped me back to reality. Ken was cosplaying as a character, and the woman was wearing only a frilly pink apron. Disgusting, I thought. Recalling Ken once mentioning he was part of a cosplay group. He hadn't cosplayed frequently since becoming a professional, but still attended events with his old club friends as a hobby. I never minded his hobby, considering it a break from his stiff job, but this was different. This was cheating. Was he enjoying some escapism through cosplay? Anger bubbled up inside me. I couldn't let this go. There's no way I can forgive this. Everything I dreamed of, my marriage, all tarnished. In my fury, I took a discreet photo with my phone and silently closed the door gap. I pondered how to get back at them for this betrayal. That's it, I'll lock them in. Muttering to myself, I slipped out of the house to execute my plan. I hurriedly bought a tension rod from a nearby hardware store, carefully setting it up at the only entrance of the room, ensuring they couldn't easily escape. There were windows, but their original clothes were in the paper bag in the living room, so they likely couldn't change to escape through the windows. I had effectively created a locked room and reached for my phone. It's a new house after all. I should show it off to the whole family. And while I'm at it, let them see those two, trapped in their disgraceful state. I called my parents, Ken's parents, and all our relatives, inviting them to an impromptu housewarming. Despite the short notice, relatives living nearby happily agreed. About 2 hours later, everyone gathered in front of our new house. As I received compliments on the beautiful house, tears started streaming down my face uncontrollably. Yes, it was a beautiful house. I had saved diligently to finally acquire my dream home. I never imagined it would come to this. My sudden crying caused a stir among the relatives. I bit my lip in frustration. "Thank you all for coming today, but I must apologize to you." Not bothering to wipe away the tears, and spilled everything that was happening in the house. "My husband, Ken, is cheating on me in this house." I told them about today being the handover day. How I had come home early from work to find him with an unknown woman in the room meant to be our bedroom. And even after 2 hours, they were still indulging in their affair. "Is that true, Holly?" The relatives initially reacted with shock, then fell silent at the pained voice of my father-in-law. He gripped my shoulder, pale-faced, and I nodded solemnly. "Ken is inside the house, right, Holly?" My angry father said and stormed into the house, with the rest of the relatives following suit, as if on cue. Amidst the bustling relatives, the two involved finally seemed to realize something was wrong. They tried to leave the room but found the door blocked by the tension rod, causing a mild panic. "What? Why won't it open? Why are there so many voices? Is someone here? When I removed the tension rod, the sliding door flung open. Ken, in his costume, and the woman wearing only an apron clinging to him, were met by a wall of relatives. Dad! What? Why are you all here? Ken stammered, hurriedly hiding the woman behind him. What is this, Ken? Who is this woman? My in-laws demanded, visibly furious. The relatives bombarded Ken and the woman with questions and accusations. We thought this was a happy occasion. What is this? What are you doing in such a ridiculous outfit? Ken started to tremble and stammer out excuses. No, this is just cosplay. She's a friend from my college, here to celebrate. Yes, a celebration. Hey, wait! Ken! The woman panicked, suddenly thrust forward by Ken. He had initially shielded her, but now seemed more concerned about his own safety. See, this is Mary, she came to celebrate, right? Right. Pushed forward, the woman named Mary tried to cover up the situation. I'm Mary, we were just cosplaying for the housewarming. With a sense of resignation, I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. That's ridiculous. Stop lying. Mary jumped at the sharp rebuke from my mother-in-law. The relatives, who had been voicing their complaints, suddenly fell silent. Ken's parents have always been strict. Even during our marriage introduction, Ken was more nervous than I was. They despised dishonesty and would quietly lend a hand to those in trouble. I thought Ken had inherited their temperament, especially after he saved his friend from financial ruin. But it seemed I was mistaken. Overwhelmed by the intense scrutiny of everyone, Ken and Mary collapsed to the floor. What a terrible betrayal, Ken. At that, Ken finally gave in, or maybe he just couldn't meet my father's gaze, and he looked down. I asked everyone to move to the living room and had Mary put on her clothes. When I handed her the paper bag, she snatched it from me, glaring. How dare you? But I glared back just as fiercely. Her glare meant nothing to me, after all, she was the mistress. The women shielded her from the men's view as she changed, but their gazes were icy. Ugh, this is unbearable. I was only with him because he was paying me. Mary grumbled as she dressed, then angrily threw the apron to the floor. There, I'm changed, she announced arrogantly, causing an aunt to raise her eyebrows in disgust. After doing something like this, don't you have any remorse? I couldn't help but raise my voice. Mary scoffed. You're Ken's wife, right? It's because you couldn't satisfy him that he cheated. I was the princess of our cosplay club, and I was doing you a favor by being with him. You should be thanking me, she said, flipping her hair and laughing scornfully. Her words made my blood boil. I clenched my fists to keep from striking her. Sure, Mary was known as the princess of the cosplay club and she was quite attractive. But inside, she was a terrible person. Was this woman really the one who destroyed everything for me? Stay away from someone else's husband, I shouted, and someone had to hold me back from lunging at her. Calm down, they said, but I was far from calm. After having Mary sit next to Ken, who was already being scolded by the men, I pulled out something from the pocket of my suit that I had retrieved earlier from the corner of the room they were in. What's that? Ken asked fearfully, too distressed to even fix his disheveled wig. Mary turned away indifferently. What I had pulled out was a small recorder. I always carried it in my suit to avoid disputes over spoken agreements in business deals. When I trapped Ken and Mary, I had quickly hidden the recorder in the room to ensure incontrovertible evidence. When I checked it earlier, not only did it have the sounds of their affair, but it also recorded a shocking plot they were involved in. Is this really true? I asked as I pressed the play button on the recorder. When Ken realized the voices were their own conversation from earlier, the color drained from his face. The recorder started playing amidst static noise, and Ken and Mary's voices began to fill the room. I still can't believe Holly actually believes the debt story. She's so gullible. Bankrupted friend, huh? You managed to keep that $600,000 secret really well. Mary chimed in, her laugh echoing in the now silent room. The conversation, unhindered by furniture in the empty room, was recorded crystal clear. Well, the friend's company did go bankrupt. I just never became a guarantor. I faked some documents, showed her a forged demand letter, and she totally fell for it. Oh, Ken, you're so clever. Not for nothing do you work at the city hall. Listening to his own triumphant voice, Ken visibly started to panic as the reality of his criminal actions set in. The relatives, who had been listening to the recorder, began to murmur among themselves. Being with the princess of the cosplay club isn't easy, I had to do this much. You liked the designer bag I bought you last time, right? Thank you always, Ken. With the harsh expressions of the relatives upon them, Ken and Mary's faces, contrary to the voices on the recorder, were filled with fear. I stopped the recorder as it began to play the sounds of their renewed activity. Biting my lip in frustration, I tasted a hint of blood. Holding back tears that threatened to spill, I glared at Ken and Mary. The realization that the money Ken claimed was for helping a friend, was actually used to lavish gifts on Mary, made my vision go dark when I first confirmed it. The money I had worked tirelessly to save for our home had been squandered on this woman. As if the financial betrayal wasn't enough, they planned to transfer the house into Ken's name, divorce me, and take the house too. His insistence on changing the house's ownership wasn't about male pride, it was pure greed. I trusted you, I said, covering my face with my hands. As tears slipped through my fingers. I had believed in Ken when he said he wanted to help his friend. I thought the man who had smiled and promised to work hard with me towards our dream of owning a home was gone, but a part of me had still held on to hope. Looking at Ken's face, I tasted despair anew. With no excuses left, Ken just sat frozen. Then, one of the relatives who had heard the recording spoke up. This is fraud. It's criminal. We should call Mary's parents too. What? Fraud? I just took the money he offered. My parents have nothing to do with this. Mary protested, trying to stand up in a panic. We forcibly got her parents' contact details and called them. Surprisingly, they lived in the next town and arrived in a hurry. Initially confused by the crowd, they rushed to Mary upon spotting her. What's all this? Mary, what have you done? Fraud? An uncle briefly explained the situation and played the recording for him. Initially defensive, Mary's father fell silent as the recording played. How could you, Mary? Mary, flustered, tried to deny the accusations. Wait, I just took the money Ken said he'd give me. It's not fraud. Be quiet. Silenced by her father's stern command, Mary quieted down immediately. We are terribly sorry for what our daughter has done. Unfazed by Mary's protests to let go, he continued apologizing. An apology from their parents couldn't heal the wounds inflicted on me. First, I will be divorcing Ken, I announced, and Ken visibly flinched at the mention of his name. His pained expression, as if he were the victim, only fueled my anger. Also, I will be demanding repayment of the debt I covered within a year, and I will ask both of you for alimony. I continued, pulling out my notebook to show them the amount I had paid, now adding alimony to it. Ken and Mary started trembling at the sight. A year is impossible. You won't be allowed to say it's impossible. Ken began, but I cut him off with a sharp glare. I wished they could pay me back immediately. Furthermore, I want you to buy this house. I can't possibly live in a house where such acts took place, I said through clenched teeth. Ken and Mary began to protest the impossibility of meeting these demands. We can't possibly pay that amount. The debt I had covered, some alimony, and buying the new house. The total was in the million. I knew they couldn't pay it off even if they sold the house. But I had no intention of lowering the amount. Please, it's impossible, reconsider. They pleaded, but the agitated relatives started to express their anger. You should never have done this in the first place. Just pay up honorably. They criticized, and the two shut their mouths in frustration. I could report this as fraud to the police. I added, and upon hearing this, Ken and Mary finally slumped in defeat. Later, I heard that Mary had been disowned by her family and had gone to work in the nightlife to repay the debt. Her parents kept a watchful eye to ensure she paid it back, but by the time she finished, she had become addicted to the lifestyle. She got caught in a cycle of creating new debts and working nights, eventually leading her parents to disown her. As for Ken, eager to escape his debt, he borrowed money from shady lenders to pay me back. Without savings, he couldn't keep up with the repayments and ended up with debt collectors showing up at his respectable workplace, forcing him to resign. Having lost his job, he had no means to pay back the growing debt and ended up in forced labor far away. A crumpled letter forwarded to my mailbox contained words of reconciliation and his current situation. As the doorbell rang, I threw the letter into the trash, opened the unfamiliar front door, and welcomed my parents. With the money returned and the sale of that dreadful house, plus the alimony paid, I had managed to buy a new home. A dream home for me and my parents. For a while, I planned to live happily with them.